All right, welcome back to another Wheel of Time video. This video is really, really exciting. We are going to be discussing about, when I say we, I mean me and Max. Max is someone I met actually, I think last year. Did I meet him 2 years ago? I don't know, but I know I met him last year at WalkCon, and he regularly comments on my videos and whatnot. And we're going to be discussing the music in the Wheel of Time. Max has a master's in music theory, and we're going to be discussing basically the genius that went into Lorne Balfe's score for the show, and all of this was so interesting. This is not an area. I feel like I did the first time I talked with Pez about the costumes. It's just like my eyes are opened, like whoa! I'm seeing stuff. This is only going to be part one. We talked for a while, way longer than we ever anticipated doing. Just going into the music. He has done a full analysis of the music from seasons 1 and 2 of the show. He hasn't fully completed his stuff from season 3. We do talk about it a bit in these videos, though, but not in this video. Exciting thing about this video, no spoilers. No spoilers beyond anything that's been revealed in the show. So if you've watched the show, you're good. You're good. So, yeah. Speaking of the show, though, you've probably heard the news that Amazon and it's been canceled. But there's a campaign to save Wheel of Time. Save what? Go check out the website. It's literally savewhat.com. Save W-O-T, what.com. Check it out. Sign the petition. Write a letter. Record a video. Do what you can. Because this story deserves it. This story, I mean, even the fact that we talked for almost 3 hours about the score, there's just so much in this show, and it's worth it. So check out the website, sign, post if you're on Twitter or whatever it's called now, the Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikToks, whatever you're on, post about it. Make noise. Make noise, because I want this show back, and you want this show. If you're watching this video, you want this show back, right? So do what you can. Make some noise. And but yeah, we'll see what happens. We are a fandom that fights. We are statistically the best. That's what they say about us. So let's prove it. Okay, do that, but also, enjoy the video that's about to come.
Let's be nerdy with Let's Be Nerdy. Let's be nerdy with Let's Be Nerdy.
Yeah, we are here to talk about the music from the Wheel of Time show. This is, I made an offhand comment in one of my breakdowns about how this is something I hadn't talked about enough. And those of us in the fandom, we know we love Lorne Balfe and his music. And Max here left me a very subtle hint in the comments. So,
about as subtle as Elida's perfume.
yes. So I guess, Max, introduce yourself. Tell a bit about your area of study and whatnot. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm Max. I was a book fan basically as soon as I was old enough to be reading these books. It got busy enough that I couldn't do a full reread when Brandon Sanderson's books started coming out. So I did not actually finish the series until I had more time with COVID, and the series was coming out, and I was like, I need to finish reading these finally. It was going to happen anyway, but I ended up leaving a PhD program with just a master's as a sort of consolation prize for not finishing my dissertation in music theory. So that is what I had been doing. I also did philosophy in college, and I found that music theory was a fun way to kind of do both, actually, the kind of research I was doing. So even though I am not a specialist in the kinds of genres that Lorne Balfe is working with, I do have plenty of transferable skills from that to apply to analyzing the soundtrack. And so I figured that is, what I can do as my own sort of special fandom contribution. I know other people have done really great breakdowns of the soundtrack. There was a Redditor, Migster. I don't really know anything about them other than the fact that during the season 1 rewatch before season 2 premiered, they were doing prose breakdowns, I think with links to to a streaming service so that you could listen, talking about the music that was in each episode week by week. And other folks have done that for season 3 and gotten ahead of the curve on that. I think some other people have even sort of developed slightly more in-depth projects of their own. I wanted to do something a little bit more in depth than that, and I've come up with this spreadsheet that if I were like, I'll have to decide now that the show has been canceled and might be over, whether I still want to invest into this. But I think I need something better than this spreadsheet. I need to do some kind of database, because the way that it's set up, you can't really go to like, okay, what's the music at this time in this episode, which is what most people actually want.
Right.
From this project. When I've shared it, they're like, oh, I don't actually know how to look up this. And it's like, oh, that's because it's not what I made it to do, really. I think eventually would like to have a different format, but for now, what I have is this very huge spreadsheet that you need to open and on a large screen and put the at least down to like 80% zoom in order to be able to really see anything. But we had been talking about doing this for a while. Then we got this news, and I think my first instinct was, well, I don't know if we're going to want to do this weekend, but pretty quickly it turned around and it's like, no, the show was great. The show deserves to get picked up by somebody else. And I think having out there in the world that like somebody who nearly got a PhD in music theory, like found a lot to sink his teeth into in this score is something that like, who knows, maybe they even will take into account. It's like, oh, this is not just a show that like has some exciting music sometimes. This is a show that has, let me scroll down, and this is just seasons 1 and 2. How many rows are in my spreadsheet? How many independent themes did I track? 128, roughly.
Yeah.
Some of those are different versions of the same thing, but 128 independent music themes that all have interesting meanings to them.
Yes, and has a fan base that cares enough to want to do this sort of thing.
Right.
And I will just we offer our services for doing free publicity for the show for the years in between the show airs. Like, that's the thing that we do because we love it so much.
I was finding that even listening to the albums a lot, it would take me a while to like really associate, oh, this is the melody that is from that track that's named this, that means this other thing. So one thing I wanted to do was just transcribe all of the melodies that I felt were important and worth tracking, because that's just how I remember things. Just as a person who reads music notation, it's
really,
if you're learning a language and you never learned the writing system, you're going to have a hard time remembering what word is which. You can't make flashcards or anything, right? But just sort of visualizing it and doing the process of transcribing and sort of fiddling around with instruments to try to make sure that I was getting notes right. Was helpful to be able to track things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What I've done for folks who don't read music notation is try to come up with sort of like easy codes for like, oh, it comes from this album, this track, and this timestamp if you want to go listen, or I could turn those into links eventually, I guess, or timestamps from the show. So that was one thing I wanted to do, just to like know what I was listening to. But then I also wanted to sort of meticulously lay out which track from the actual soundtrack albums aligned with what parts of the show, because it turns out to be really tricky to find where the music is happening in the show. And what I mean by this, by soundtrack album, and this is something I learned from Nikhil Kolparkar from when we were both on Dusty Wheel, is that the workflow was generally Lorne Balfe would get the old tongue sort of poetry from Naomi, the language consultant.
Yeah.
He would make basically a full album of themes that would be used in the soundtrack, and as kind of finished final versions of songs that could stand on their own. And so that's for season 1, that was the first turn. For season 2, that was volume 1. And then I think Balfe and his sort of assistant composer team would work together to create the actual cues throughout the episodes. And of course, I'm sure, it's not as though they waited until they had a final edit to start the music. So I'm sure it went back and forth a lot, where they wrote things out and then were like, this is not going to work. We have to cut this down and reshape this melody to fit this, now that they've edited the transition between these scenes. So they basically got the in-show soundtrack to a finalized state, and then they took all of everything they had written for that and made them into the album tracks.
Right.
For the what I would call like the soundtrack albums proper that actually play the music as it's played in the show. And so that's volumes 1, 2, 3 for season 1, and then volume 1 for season 2, and then of course season 3 we just didn't get one.
Yeah.
And I at first I wondered if maybe that was because they were getting more and more granular with the cues rather than doing like an extended scene that has like where you could just take the music out of the scene and play it as a track that would make sense on its own, that they weren't doing that as much. But it seems to me that it's actually more, I think, just they didn't want to put together the albums. But it was maybe a money thing or an interest thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, you did send me your spreadsheet, and I did try going through. It is a lot, especially if if it's not your area of expertise. I was just like, oh, I feel like I'm reading Greek right now.
Yeah,
like a lot of things. Yeah,
yeah. So the first worksheet is just sort of like general prose notes about the project, which if you're watching this video, you don't really need to worry about. And then the next worksheet that's labeled index and tracker.
Okay.
Yeah, that one. Is where I have the transcription of each melody, the name of the album track, and then I came up with a shorthand for what to call it, and that goes into something that I'll talk about in just a minute. And then the sort of timestamp code, and then a sort of description. And I didn't, some of these are more filled in than others, but sort of interpretive notes about it. And then if you have all of those frozen, and you can always hide some. You can scroll to the right and see really what I was doing was trying to, and you need a big screen and to have it open a lot, which is fine for this. Yeah. I mean, I have mine open on my end, so we can, when we actually need to use it, when we start talking about the music itself, we can do that. It's really organized on a theme basis. So if you wanted to know, where does that accompaniment figure from the Aes Sedai track, which is the credits, the opening credits song, like where does that get played? Oh, and it turns out if you scroll through every episode, it shows up in lots of places that have nothing to do with Moraine. And so that's the kind of insight you can get by organizing things this way. And then the final tab at the bottom is just a like very close side by side of each track on the albums, the soundtrack albums, and where it shows up in the episode. And even like right off the bat, you can tell that sometimes it skips around quite a bit. Like the track "The Hunt" skips around a lot within the first episode, and then there are some that are taken from multiple episodes. There are some that I think must have been just music that got cut in the final edit, and so we got stuff on those albums that was made to go in the show, but just never ended up there.
But never made it there.
The biggest culprit is the season 1 finale. There's so much like battle music that is just impossible to correlate with like where exactly it's showing up in the show.
Right. That
and
makes
like
sense,
the timings don't match up. So I imagine because that must have been an editing nightmare that there was a lot of back and forth, and they were like, okay, we're going to have whatever is happening in the show just happen. And then we're going to take, if we had written out like 7 minutes of music that made sense together, we're just going to keep that for the album, even though it doesn't make sense with the show anymore.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Because this is a show, obviously, often you need to tone the music down while people are talking or while action, if you need to hear the sound of action, then that will take precedence or things like that. So even though I think, my instinct as a classical music person is to kind of treat this like a Wagner opera and track all the evolutions of all the melodies as they appear, and that's rewarding. At the same time, the music can play a very big role, but only when it's not stepping on the toes of things that need to be paid attention to. And so that attention game is...
Who was it? I think it was Danny from Wheel Weaves once said that she doesn't notice music. And when she notices it, it's generally because it's bad. Like she wants the soundtrack to be like, she wants it to be there, obviously, and to help with the thing. But if she's walking away from a show, like and that's her specifically, but I understand what she means by that. Like if I'm walking away from something thinking, oh, the music, maybe it was overshadowing the scene as opposed to, you know what I mean?
Right. And it's interesting that I should have gone over. So I was just at TorqueCon, and I gave out. I'll be right back. I gave out ribbons that say, "Do you know the song?"
Yes.
And in order to earn them, what you had to do was tell me your favorite diegetic and or non-diegetic music. And I guess I should define those. Diegetic music is stuff like Hills of Tanchico that is actually playing in the world.
Yeah.
So someone is making the sounds in the scene. And non-diegetic is the underscore that we are hearing that no one in the world is hearing. And Wheel of Time obviously is mixing so many cultures in its music and drawing on so many different genres that that they can get away with a lot in the underscore. But there are certainly times when there's music that could be diegetic that you're hearing, and it's like, is this somebody playing off, like just off screen down the road in Tarvalon? Because it sounds like it's, just a bunch of like cool instruments from around the world that you would find in Tarvalon, or is this soundtrack only? So it's not a crisp distinction between diegetic and non-diegetic all the time.
Yeah.
But I'm mostly interested.
We spoke last night but last night my time about like one of my favorite moments. The reason that I actually commented on this was the use of the song in episode 4 of season 3. I'm realizing why I didn't notice it the first time. It's because you don't hear the song until later, like the actual song that the Aiel sing in the Age of Legends. But on a rewatch, you catch that they're playing it earlier, just in, we call it non-diegetic.
Non-diegetic, it appears non-diegetically first, which is very interesting.
And on a rewatch, it almost made me cry when I caught it. It's like, oh my gosh, like it's beautiful how they're using that.
And I started tracking that, and I have a plan for us to look at it a little bit along with some other things. So I guess I could segue into sort of the like principles I was using, because I think that brings us to some of the things that we brought up. So the first principle was meaning is a two-way street. So just because the music you're hearing in a scene comes from a track labeled Aes Sedai doesn't mean that it's telling you that Moraine is the most important thing in the scene. It could be that what's happening in the scene is showing you a different angle on what that music means somehow. And so to some extent, you need to not, and this is why I tried to create very neutral sort of short names to refer to all of these two in my notes, so that I didn't name something the corruption on Sidene theme. And then like lock myself into thinking that's what it means all the time. So I just called it like, it's from this album. So I'm going to call it by the name of the album track, and say what part of the song it is, rather than say, oh, this is the Tuatha On theme, even though I think, there is actually a Tuatha On theme. And it's not, you wouldn't know from even the lyrics, but there is one. So as the music goes through the season, each time it appears, it kind of like Katamari, it like collects meanings around it as it goes through. But then obviously each time it goes through, it's also bringing all of those meanings into that scene.
Yeah.
So there's, and then of course there's also the two-way street of like, what other music does this sound like? What are the musical qualities themselves that it's bringing to it? What are the lyrics? And I intentionally tried not to think too much about the lyrics, although I've looked at them sometimes, because I wanted to remain open to like allowing the melodies themselves to tell me what they meant as they appear.
Yeah. And I also think that I love that they're using the old tongue, but that does create a distance between us and the lyrics, because none of us watching, unless you are like Pavara Sedai, like nobody's hearing those lyrics and going, I know exactly what they mean as you're hearing them. It's so that is something that can only come later when you're doing an analysis like this or whatnot.
Yeah. And often, even if the lyrics are relevant, you might be hearing it instrumentally in the context of the show to an extent where it's unclear whether you should be allowing the lyrics to dictate what it means in that instance. So that's part of it. And then the other big principle was that if something can appear by itself in a recognizable way, I should be open to trying to track that by itself. And so that's what I mean when I was, one of the big examples of this is the what Lorne Balfe called the seesaw strings. In that video that we're about to talk that I talk about that I sent to you earlier. So the accompaniment figure in the Moraine track in the credits, I do have my violin and I'm a little rusty, so I'm a little nervous if I'll play. That's I'm not playing that well, but I could not play that on the piano because I'm pretty sure that, and I'm pretty sure it's a little loosey goosey in the actual soundtrack and albums themselves, that you're playing in between the notes that you have on a piano. So it's not,
it's
an E or an F. It's halfway between an E and an F.
Yeah.
Which is
I recognize
interesting.
that music completely. Like I fully, immediately, like, oh, I know what's happening in this scene.
Yeah. So it's interesting that it's so iconic in the opening credits that are, shots of the tapestry and the pattern being woven. So it feels like it has something sort of grander in its meaning than just being attached to Moraine, even though this is, the melody that's given her name. And I think a lot of that is because Moraine is the person who has the most agency at the beginning of the story. She knows what is going on. She knows what the stakes are. She's the one out looking. So even Swan is not as on the front lines of like the part that, ends up being the most important, which is finding the Dragon Reborn and guiding them and making sure that the shadow doesn't get to them first. At first I thought, maybe the more general meaning is like, when you hear just that bit at the beginning of the intro and the thread is about to snap and then it cuts away right as it snaps, that like this is the sound of the pattern in trouble or something. What I have found is that if you just look for that, it happens a lot without Moraine present. It happened. You sometimes hear instead of the sort of fluctuating where it goes up a little bit, sort of in microtones and then comes back down, almost like a sort of breeze. There are times when it just keeps going higher and higher, where it might be something like. And we can hear that at times during the Logain opening in episode 4 of season 1.
Wow.
When he's channeling, you hear like a version of this, basically. You can also hear it just in the cold open for the pilot. I believe even though you're not seeing it because you're in the head of the man who's being hunted down, I think it's roughly around when Leandrin channels to try to block him from escaping.
Stop! I said stop!
Yeah.
So it seems to have to do with moments and the first time we hear it associated with Moraine in the first episode is when she slices the Trolloc in half. That's threatening.
Yes, that's when you started playing it. Yeah. That's literally the image that when I said I know what scene this is. That was the scene I was thinking of. Yeah.
Oh, awesome! That it's very iconic for that moment. It seems like if we're looking at all the meanings it's picking up so far, that it sort of signifies the one power when it's being used in a way that is either against the shadow or somehow is threatening and ominous in itself because we don't know where it's coming from. We don't know the person who's doing it. We're not sure of the motives of the person who's doing it. we do sometimes hear it just when folks are channeling in general. There's also eventually a version of this, and I don't even call it a melody. And indeed, sometimes we want to track things that aren't just melodies. We want to track accompaniment figures. There's also it gets slowed down and it doesn't have the microtones. Can you remember where you've heard that?
No.
It's pretty subtle.
It's the same tune, but not exactly. Like it has,
Yeah. It dips down a little bit.
Yes.
It's a lot more sort of behaved and ordered and in a rhythm. This is, it happens. I'm not sure if we hear it while Moiraine is riding out from Varen's home and gets caught by the Murdral.
Yeah.
But it definitely plays when Bail Doman when Bail Doman talks about the men in the black cloaks following him. Moiraine is putting it together, and so part of this might be the meaning of, you know, when folks are going up against the shadow. But I think the fact that it's slowed down and it's a lot tamer. Go ahead.
I was going to say that music to me always. Okay, I'm putting words to thoughts that I haven't really had before, but it has like a building quality. So having it appear in that moment, it does feel like she is, what do you call it? Like she's gathering her power. Like in that moment, she's putting things together. She's like, okay, I need to get my resources together. Of course, at that point in the story, she doesn't have the one power, but I can see that it makes sense to me. Like it makes sense in a way that I can't exactly articulate in words, but that same music would appear in the moment when she's putting together, oh, the shadow is like it makes emotional sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right, that it has an emotional quality that matches the moment.
These men you say are following you, what do they look like?
Well, they got a glimpse from a distance. Once, when we left the dock at White Bridge, 2 men in black cloaks on horseback.
Did you see their faces?
No. Their hoods covered them.
There it is.
Go back to your boat. Now, take it to Ilian, don't stop, and then onto the sea. Sail east or west as far and fast as you can.
This breeze, a riverboat.
Then stay to the shallows. But go, now. Here are 10 marks for provisions.
Now we hear the original Seesaw
The
strings.
wheel weaves as the wheel wheels, Master Doman. Light be with you.
Fully there. Like it's just fully there. But I think it's a different instrument. I did because the violins are so distinct, right? Like they stand out of it. Well, I didn't even notice that it was that same music there. But you're right, it is.
Yeah, but it's certainly slowed down enough to feel like a different thing. I think I gave it its own line in the spreadsheet, and I think it's interesting that because we don't get the intro music throughout most of season 2 until the finale, we don't hear Moraine's personal melody along with this motif that I think is at least partially associated with using the one power in a mysterious way or to fight the shadow or something. So it's interesting that even when we hear a version of this motif, it's kind of lost a lot of the oomph that it has on her track because she doesn't have her power. So
that's
we can't
the thing
hear,
I was going to say. Like
yeah.
there's an immediacy to the violins. Like they feel really present. Where in the scene where she has the power and she's literally slicing a Trolloc in half, and in this scene it does feel like it's there. It's very clearly there, and I can't believe it's blowing my mind that it's there. But it's not as immediate. Like it feels more like it's a foundation instead of a. I don't know the words. You know words to use about this to talk about this, but it doesn't feel.
I think part of it might be part of it might be the mix, and I'm not a sound engineer, so I can't necessarily speak too much to that. But also the fact that the violins are it's an octave lower, so it's just
Right.
being high pitched brings
Yeah,
things
yeah.
out more. And they're not using, like, I think in the title track, they're using a certain technique where you play in a way that distorts the sound a little bit. I can demonstrate.
That's very exciting.
That would be like, what they're playing there. And then, but in the title track, they use a form of distortion where they play close to the bridge, and it creates like you hear a lot more of the overtones. And it's not everyone doing that, and it's not like super clear, but there's I think a little bit of that kind of like natural distortion in their technique in the title track that brings that out as well. So there are a lot of things that just my notations don't capture, and so where I felt I had a grasp on things about instrumentation or timbre or electronic distortion, I tried to throw that into the spreadsheet, but it's Western notation didn't develop to necessarily handle those things in a graphical way. So there's only so much I could do with that. That was sort of like the first one that I knew would yield results of tracking things separately and not assuming that something always means the title of the track it came from.
Right.
But I knew that I was sort of using the right principles there when I finally found that video that is, I think, like just chronically underappreciated and buried on one of the Sony YouTube
it's a
channels.
Sony channel, actually. Yeah, when I watched it, I was like, well, that's why I never saw it. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll link it in the video description, and everyone should go watch it. But it's Lorne Balfe, the main series composer, doing sort of talking through in voiceover some moments from the pilot of season 1, specifically the Battle of Beltane. And he and it's cool just the way that he talks about, he often says things like, oh, we carve out space for this to happen. So, often the best music is no music. He says a couple things that are very interesting. One, that we don't, when Moiraine starts channeling after that moment that stuck out to you, where she slices the Trolloc in half, and then we see her sort of gloriously flinging weaves around.
Yes.
We're not hearing Moraine's theme because we're seeing Moiraine through the village's eyes as this Aes Sedai that's come to town. She represents the institution of the Aes Sedai, and so we hear the Aes Sedai theme. And it's interesting that we hear the same version of the Aes Sedai theme at the end of season 2, when she finally has her powers back and has a reason to use them because she believes that Rand is being shielded or something by the Damane on the boats. We associate that scene with the Battle of Beltane, partly because of the music, although also partly because Lan is they're back in sync and he's defending her and everything, right? But the music is a huge part of that. And of course, we also get a lot of the Seesaw strings, as Lorne describes them in that video, during that moment as well, because she's finally got she's channeling, she's drawing a lot in. We don't know exactly what she's going to do. And so it's exactly the kind of channeling music where we would hear those strings. I would encourage folks to go give some views to that
Yeah.
video. Like, I don't think it can hurt. The other thing from that video that I think was a sort of guiding principle is that Lorne talks a lot about why he uses an ostinato, which is like a repeating accompanimental figure that has a very distinctive like unit that it's repeating. The ostinato from the Aes Sedai track, the Dragon Reborn track, while the villagers are fighting back, once Moiraine has kind of turned the tide and the women's circles start fighting. And I think we hear it a little bit while Perrin and Layla are fighting in the forge. And that ostinato gets layered with another ostinato that we only hear in these kinds of fight scenes. And that's the music actually that we always hear during the previously on. It was interesting to hear Lorne's reasoning for this. I mean, to some extent, maybe he just, needed some exciting, like very rhythmic music to play with a fast pulse. But he said that he chose that because he felt that that Dragon Reborn music was relevant to a bunch of villagers fighting back because there was a reason that Moiraine had come to this town. And I'm just recapping what you just heard, but and what you, the listener, can go listen to Lorne himself talk about. But I found that interesting that often that while sometimes the music is picking up the meaning from the scene, that sometimes we also want to think about what that music is bringing to the scene, and we're seeing that Aes Sedai track is not. First of all, it's not a Rand-centric track. At first, we don't even know that Rand is the dragon, but it can also be used for just folks fighting against Shadow Spawn. What Lorne says is obviously part of that reason that it's being used there, because Moiraine knows that this is the kind of place that would raise the dragon. But I think it's also because the dragon is a symbol of fighting against the shadow to some extent. So I think, but I think that that's true for that element of the Dragon Reborn track, but maybe not so much for the slower melody in that track, which goes so. Right, that's the main melody for the Dragon Reborn track.
Yeah.
And then the ostinato that I'm talking about is something like that.
Okay. Okay. Because I was going to ask, if you wanted me to pull up an example from the episode, but okay, that's great. Thank you. All right, there you have it. That is part one of this conversation that we had about the score. And like I said, there's more. We talked for almost 3 hours, so I don't know how many parts this video is going to be. No idea. We'll see what happens when I'm editing them together. But there's a lot to talk about. It was really interesting, and there's the heart and the passion that went into the show. Again, I'm going to tell you, sign the petition, sign it, write your letter, make your video, do what you can, make your noise, because I want to save Wheel of Time. You want to save Wheel of Time. So let's do it, okay? But also, if you like my content, you want to support me, I also have a Patreon that is linked in the description below. To all my patrons, again, thank you so much for this. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much. And with that, I'm gonna end this here. So please like, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.